Well, here we go again. God, I hate this brace stuff. I hate it so much. We're in this drawn-out fight over whether or not an accessory puts a gun into a restricted category that never should have existed in the first place. It's absurd, and we're going to talk about why all of this is so absurd here in this video. You've definitely heard about the ATF's proposed rule affecting pistol braces. You've probably heard people shouting that the ATF is banning pistol braces, or whatever. Well, they're damn well trying, but they can't do that. That's why the ATF has engaged in this absurd 26-page proposed rulemaking to dance around its lack of power and try to effectuate a ban the only way they can. To get what I mean when I say they can't, you have to understand what the ATF's power is with respect to the law here. The ATF has the authority to regulate firearms that fall within the National Firearms Act and Gun Control Act. It does not have the authority to regulate simple accessories like braces, stocks, grip pods, or tucko holders. Now, you might be saying, but bump stocks, and I agree. However, this question is very different. There was a hole for ATF to ram the semi-truck of the bump stock ban through it. That ban was totally in excess, for sure, but the NFA does specifically identify machine gun conversion kits as machine guns. I agree that bump stocks are not machine gun conversion kits, but still, that's the needle's eye that existed there. In this instance, though, it appears not even the ATF think they have the authority to regulate or opine on pistol braces themselves. They're just trying to, prevent you from attaching one to anything. Remember the last time ATF spoke up about braced pistols. ATF recognized that the GCA and the NFA, which it's tasked with enforcing, regulate firearms and not individual components. As such, ATF does not classify unregulated components or accessories alone. So the basis of this entire activity is on whether or not a brace, when attached to a gun, is a short-barreled rifle or short-barreled shotgun. They're asserting authority on the whole, not the part, which makes it a little interesting. If you've been into guns for a while, the thought has probably crossed your mind. Why the heck are SBRs even regulated anyway? You might have heard that it's because SBRs are gangster guns, or that it's because they're particularly concealable or dangerous. All of these have some, truth to them with respect to what the government thinks, but possibly not in the way you might think. While the use of cut-down shotguns in the Prohibition era was common, the violence and mob rise to power was entirely the fault of the government, by the way. People don't like it when you take away their alcohol. SBRs, as we presently understand them, were not. So why are SBRs the target of so much ire? Why is the ATF fighting so hard to keep them from us? Well, you've got to understand the original purpose of the NFA, the chief component of which wasn't to restrict machine guns, but rather the most commonly used crime guns of them all, the handgun. That's right, the NFA's original draft subjected handguns to the same regulations as machine guns, and public support for a handgun ban was huge. At some point when drafting the law, someone posed the question, well, if we just get rid of handguns, won't people just, chop down long boys and be able to create the functional equivalent of a handgun? So they sought to prevent this end run around handgun regulation by restricting concealable weapons made from rifles and shotguns. It was all to prevent you from affordably having a concealable firearm. Think about it. All the stuff we think about in terms of SBRs, AOWs, and all those other categories, it applies precisely to handguns. It's all about weapons being capable of concealed on the person. The feds didn't want you circumventing an effective handgun ban by just obrezing something, most specifically a shotgun, which they were super duper spooked about. Compare that to now when the only guns we can easily import into the United States are shotguns. Funny what a fickle beast our overlords can be, isn't it? Remember, also, that in 2008, our nation's highest court ruled that those firearms most capable of being concealed on the person and most prevalent in all types of crime, handguns, lie at the very core of our Second Amendment protection. How does it follow, then, that we have the core right to the most concealable gun, but if we take that same gun, attach a stock or even a brace to it, thereby making it less concealable, it somehow becomes felonious? To put a pin on how pants-on-head cognitively hilarious this whole thing is, think about this. The feds in the 30s wanted to ban handguns, and they were scared you'd take your rifle and make it concealable. So they said you can't chop down rifles because this would make the rifle small. A few decades later, the feds, after sniffing some paint and rereading that same law, get scared that you might take a small, concealable gun and attach something to it that will make it bigger and more like a rifle. This insanity highlights the fact that SBR restrictions were never intended to stand on their own. It was always intended as part of a handgun ban, and since we don't have one, there is no reason we should hold on to SBR laws. Of course, ATF tries to talk its way out of this by barely glancing over the entirety of this mess and just straight up saying, oh, well, these are gangster-type weapons. I'm serious. ATF thinks your honey badger is a Capone gun. Of course, there is no logic underlying the intentions here. In the current administrative state, working with them is like playing a game with a 4-year-old. If you haven't played a game with a 4-year-old, regardless of what game you might think you're playing, to the 4-year-old, the game is always, I win. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this current game, the proposed rule and those elements of it that are manic. As you all know, the agency has put out this adorable little worksheet, the top of which tells you the worksheet is entirely useless and that ATF will still call your gun that passes the test an SBR if they feel like it. To quote, ATF reserves the right to preclude classification as a pistol for any firearm that achieves an apparently qualifying score, but is an attempt to circumvent the NFA. How's that for guidance and clarity? If that's not arbitrary and capricious, I really don't know what is. Then we've got our prerequisites. The gun must be at least 4 pounds and 12 inches long with accessories removed. If it doesn't meet this and you put a brace on it, they automatically consider it an SBR. Also, if it's more than 26 inches long with accessories removed and you put a brace on it, they also automatically consider it an SBR. This is kind of absurd as there are fairly few guns that would have an overall length less than 26 inches without accessories that wouldn't also have a nigh on 16-inch barrel. As you know, putting a stock on a long handgun is perfectly fine if it's got a 16-inch barrel. One example of an extreme longboy handgun is the PPS-43 pistols that flooded the market a few years back and are still commonly available. These bad boys have an obnoxiously long receiver and a 10-inch barrel. Even still, they're only 24 inches long. So what are they getting after here? Well, they're trying to eliminate the utility of pistols over 26 inches, which can have a foregrip attached without becoming an AOW. When you remember stuff like the Mark 18, an extremely popular gun to make a pistol out of, it has an overall length about 28 5/8 inches. This means that when braced, it could also legally have a foregrip. ATF apparently doesn't like that. So they're just going to do what every unaccountable administrative agency has done in the last few decades and just change the deal, right? Alter the terms of the deal. Of course, ATF is saying that it's basing its criteria on something else, that being a vague notion of what guns can easily be fired one-handed and thus not need a brace, and also what guns it thinks are too cumbersome to fire one-handed and thus also not need a brace. Of course, ATF is saying that it's basing its criteria on something else, that being a vague notion of what guns can easily be fired one-handed and thus not need a brace, and also what guns it thinks are too cumbersome to fire one-handed and thus also not need a brace. This concept is absurd for a few reasons. For one, nowhere in the law does it authorize ATF to invent felonies based on how it perceives the needs and physical strength levels of American gun owners. As my friend Mark Hauser showed, some people are totally able to one-hand big guns, and if pistol braces are a thing that exist, there's no reason they shouldn't be able to slap one on a big honkin' pistol. Furthermore, this leaves that those guns over 26 inches are still properly called pistols, but that pistol brace, the thing that's supposed to make it easier to fire a big pistol, that turns it into a rifle. This renders these guns like Schrodinger's pistol. On top of that, the minimum weight requirement of 64 ounce is entirely bonkers. ATF claims that this minimum weight requirement is because handguns under 4 pounds are too easy to shoot without a brace to warrant one. This, yet they recognize that braces serve a purpose of helping the physically frail to one-hand a gun. The funny thing here is guns like the Desert Eagle, which are over 4 pounds, but under 12 inches. Apparently this is heavy enough to where you could make use of a brace, but, it's so short that even if you were, disabled or had an injury, you wouldn't need a brace to help you with something like this. It's just too small, right? It's itty-bitty. You can fire this one hand all day, right? Right. Basically, what the ATF is saying here is that if you're so disabled that it's hard for you to hold a 3-pound gun one-handed, you're SOL. Or to get a bigger gun. which is kind of insane. I've shot with people who had medical conditions that rendered a pistol brace incredibly useful for firing a Glock. The fact that ATF is trying to eliminate this capability is not only arbitrary, it's kind of cruel and messed up. Why are they doing this? Well, they're probably freaked out by the pistol braces that people actually attach to ordinary pistols. Why'd that freak them out? Recall the clown car discussion from earlier. You notice me mention with accessories removed too. ATF says this is for all non-essential accessories. What does that mean? Well, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. They don't say. So if we've got a Goldilocks gun, it's not too heavy, not too light, not too long, not too short, we get to proceed on to stage 2 of this little worksheet. Stage 2 is about the design of the brace itself. You know, the thing ATF isn't supposed to have the authority to weigh in on. But when it's attached to a gun, suddenly it's okay, according to them. This part of the worksheet contains objective factoring criteria, such as whether the brace incorporates shoulder stock design features, which I'm sure is completely clear to you and not at all ambiguous. This section has 4 subsections focused on brace design, rear surface area, adjustability, and stabilizing support. Certain factors are assigned point values, and if you get 4 points out of a possible 10 in this section, the accessory is characterized as a stock. Again, the thing that they weren't supposed to be able to. Anyway, the first factor is brace design. 0 points if it's not based on a known shoulder stock design, which is meaningless. 1 point if it incorporates shoulder stock design features, and 2 points if it is based on a known shoulder stock design. What's the difference between the last two? I don't know. Nobody knows. It's a mess. Next up, there's rear surface area. 0 points if the brace has features designed to prevent it from being used as a shouldering device, which I guess means a tetanus nail sticking out of the back. 1 point if it has minimal rear surface, which discourages shouldering. So maybe like write, don't shoulder me on the back. I don't know. 2 points if the rear surface is useful for shouldering the gun, and 3 points if there's material added to increase the rear surface area for shouldering. Now for that last one, you might think, oh, that makes sense. I mean, if you pour concrete into your brace, you made it a stock, right? That's not how the ATF is looking at it. From the examples they gave, they referred to this design as having material added for shouldering. Added to what? That's how the freaking thing came out of the box. Stupid. Next up is adjustability, where they randomly add 2 points if the brace is adjustable at all, because obviously everyone's forearm is the same, and if you need adjustment, you're clearly just trying to make an SBR. It might, long arms, short arms, no, there's one arm size, man. Finally, there's stabilizing support, where ATF defined 4 classes of brace: counterbalance design, fin type, cuff type, and split stock. Of course, we aren't entirely sure what they're talking about, and it's up to ATF's opinion on whether your brace fully, partially, or fails to wrap around your arm. You can get up to 3 points in this subsection. If your gun somehow manages to get by there with less than 4 points, you get to advance to section 3, which focuses on the weapon's overall configuration. Here, the first question is what the length of pull is, which is pretty clearly a measurement only intended for shoulder stocks, and it's obvious the ATF is stacking the cards here as they first refer to the brace as a shouldering device with stabilizing brace in scare quotes after it. If this distance is less than 10.5 inches, you get no points. For every inch after that, you get a point to a maximum of 4 if it's over 13.5 inches. Then the attachment method, where your gun is penalized if the buffer tube is adjustable at all, whether it's extended, if it folds, if it has spacers, if it's a modified shoulder stock, or if it makes it hard to aim. From what I can glean, you can rack up to 10 points here. Remember, 4 and you're out. That's this subsection alone. Then they focus on modifications to the brace, with the main takeaway here being, don't lose your strap. You can get up to 4 points in this subsection. Finally, and possibly the most absurd section of all, is where they add even more points to your gun based on random nonsense. Your gun's an auto SBR if it's got a foregrip, if it has most magnified optics, or if it's over 120 ounces in total with the accessories and an unloaded magazine. You also get points for a hand stop if it has rifle sights, if it has no sights, and if it has a bipod or monopod. You can get up to 19 points in this subsection. The way I see it, in section 2, you could possibly get up to 37 points, most of which being based on factors that have nothing to do with whether you intended to create an SBR or not. And remember, you only need 4 points to fail. Of course, none of this really matters anyway, since right at the beginning, ATF more or less admits that the test is meaningless because they'll still call your gun an SBR if they feel like it. The comment period is open now, and it's important for us to point out just how arbitrary, capricious, unnecessary, and preposterously difficult to enforce this will be. Most importantly, to me anyway, is the fact that millions of guns outfitted exactly like this have already been sold and are certainly in common lawful use. Remember that prosecutions of NFA violations require intent to violate the law. None of these factors have anything to do with user intent. It just serves to muddy the waters and make being an American gun owner even more of a legal minefield. Remember, the courts have held that guns in common lawful use are protected by the Second Amendment. It's pretty clear that braced pistols, and even SBRs, are not the weapons of organized crime as the ATF seems to be leading us to believe. They're ordinary guns sold over the counter all across the country. Even if they were covered by the NFA, which braced pistols aren't, I think there's a good legal argument that ATF can't suddenly felonize all these owners. Check out my video from a while back on authoring your own comment, or if you don't have the time to do your own, you can use one of the templates some organizations put out, but I strongly recommend writing your own. It makes a big difference. If you're unfamiliar with navigating the regulatory mire, you can visit savethebraces.com, where there's resources to help you submit your own comment. If you ask me, I think this whole mess proves one and only one thing, and that's that the regulation of firearms based on length is completely clown shoes and should be immediately repealed. I'm happy to say there are some people that I'm working with to help bring a proposal to get just that done. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you guys more details in the future, but crossing my fingers for now. For now, though, if there's a best way forward, it's making it clear just how common and loved these firearms are, and just how manic and absurd this attempt to sweep them all away is. These are not dangerous guns. They're not extraordinary. In fact, they're ordinary, safe, and incredibly useful. We've learned over the past few years just how incredibly good these guns are for various purposes, including and especially self-defense. It's extremely clear to me that the executive is testing the limits of the legal system. This is clear and day an act of politically motivated bureaucratic legislation, not a good faith interpretation of existing law as it's supposed to be. Well, that's it for today, guys. Let me just say I really appreciate you watching and subscribing. It makes a huge difference. If you want to support me more than that, I started up a Patreon and a Subscribestar. I've added benefits like a patron-only podcast, a Discord, and there's surely more to come. This kind of support will help enable me to make more content more regularly, something I really want to be able to do. There's also a link to the Fuddbusters sticker and the Magic ATF ball in the description below. Something tells me we might be needing these coming up. Thank you all so much for watching to the end and for your support. I'll see you next time, or if you become a patron or Subscribestar, I'll see you on the Discord. Remember, the anti-side has been working long and hard, passing laws and trying to make more. Anything more than minimum compliance is self-regulation. Y'all take care.